Alright folks, Casual Dad here, back with another quick Warhammer Combat Cards introductory video. I wanted to talk a little bit specifically about competitive ladder, about playing to actually progress in the ladder, get those rewards, and get those honor ranks. And just a quick recap, that's determined by this total trophy score right here, and that total trophy score is a combination of your 4 highest ranked factions. So as you play, these top 4 can change. If I got a couple wins as Tyranids, I could overtake Orc in points, and then those two would swap positions. And so that's actually a really good way to play, especially when you're starting out. It's going to be a little bit luck-based on your matches, because you could, anytime you play a game, could be a 50-50 shot if you're going to win or lose. So when you get a card to a really good honor rank, you can stop playing that, or when you get a faction rather, you can stop playing that faction and then play other factions to try to get parity with that. So like when I usually play, my Eldar ends up being my top by a mile, followed closely by Orcs and Tyranids, and then kind of the others, I'm always jockeying for that 4th and 5th slot to see who's going to get best. So I'll usually get my decks to about 3k each, or my factions, I keep doing that, sorry. I'll get my factions to 3k each, and then kind of rotate who I'm playing, and get kind of those incremental increases to try to hit that like 13,000 top 6%. And so that is the best way to play. Pick your single most powerful faction, let that kind of be your anchor, and play that a bunch and get nice and highly ranked. And then have 4 others rather that you rotate through. So like say I get my Eldari to 2k, then I'll play everyone else to 2k, and then I'll play my 5th faction to get that to 2k as well, and then kind of see who does better. And when I hit 2k, then try for 2200, try for 2500, try for 3k. So kind of get those incremental gains so you get a lot of the most possible benefit with the least possible loss. And you do want to kind of tweak your decks. As you play a little bit, you're kind of going to get an idea of what you have to go up against and what kind of decks you're going to see. So that's kind of the key tip there. For me personally, you saw my top factions. My top warlords by far are going to be Lilith. This is my deck with Lilith. This is absolutely terrifying right now, especially got a big boost from those secondary traits, both for this guy, now getting Furious Charge. So with Lilith, when you play a card, if that card gets a kill, it pops back to your hand up to 2 times. So you want to be getting those kills so you can clear cards out and preserve your kind of heavy hitters, because whenever it kills an enemy card, especially on deploy, it comes back to your hand without ever taking a hit back. So then you get them further and further in the game at full health, and it makes it that much easier to follow through. So absolutely terrific warlord, really good ability, and also just gained the secondary trait Furious Charge, which is great with her, because even as good as she is, if you get Lilith on the board, there's a good chance you've already lost that game. It's definitely going to be a very close one. And Furious Charge, even rank 2 with her pretty solid melee stat, is a really nice perk. That's a huge benefit to her, even though she didn't really need it, because her ability is incredibly powerful just with her bodyguards. My next top is going to be the Orc. And there are a couple really good Orcs. Zagstruck is one of the better ones, especially right now. He, again, got a big benefit from... Let me go ahead and select him. Got a big benefit from those secondary traits. Not himself. He's only rare, so he doesn't get a secondary trait, but a number of bodyguards in here got additional traits, the biggest winner being this guy. So Zagstruck's ability is whenever a card readies, so if you choose an attack type it doesn't have, so if you have a ranged melee card and you do a psychic attack, it would ready, but instead it's just going to hit the enemy team, and if they don't have a psychic attack themselves, it will hit them without any reprisal. So it's another case where you can get a bunch of attacks built up very quickly without taking damage back. It can be a little bit glassy. If you're up against a psychic deck, that can be a challenge. If you're up against a really heavy melee deck or a really durable deck, they can kind of blunt that. But you've got a lot of flexibility in how you play this, and so it's an extremely powerful deck. But the reason I brought this guy up is he already had that ready. So you drop him, he does an attack immediately because he has that ready on deploy, which is awesome, especially with a melee stat. That he just lands for 84 damage before anything has happened that turn. And then he also has Furious Charge 1, and since he's legendary, he can go up to Furious Charge 4, where he will hit with his full attack twice. And then if it's your turn, you can attack a 3rd time before the enemy has a chance to even respond. So this guy is just beyond bonkers. And he's a really powerful card already, but just is so good in Zagstruck decks. And then the other ones are these two. This guy getting that attack on drop, very similar thing, where you want to do as much damage when your cards land as possible, so you can kind of keep up that momentum. He's only epic, so you have to be level 9 to even benefit from that, but it still is very good. Likewise for this guy, also got that attack on drop. He's a bit of a weirder case, you probably won't see in these decks as much, but I'm trying to get him to work right now that I got that decent level, and he's been very effective, especially at that price point with those hit points and having every possible attack stat. So he's an actual, like, reasonable cost card that has a psychic attack, so when I'm readying and using a psychic attacks for the other cards, he just hits for psychic. But also because he has a native psychic attack, if you're up against a psychic deck, he will attack back, where your other cards won't, which is terrific. But yeah, so then my other kind of top deck here is Mozrog. And he's a tricky one, because he's a little bit two-dimensional. You just want really big, beefy cards that hit as hard as possible, that have a lot of hit points, that will benefit from his ability, which is, whenever one of your friendly orc cards makes a melee attack, they gain 10% of their base wounds. So they just heal up. And the tougher they are, the higher that amount is. So with his 300 health and gaining Furious Charge, which is great, he will heal a lot and be very difficult to remove himself. But then also, the cards you include with him have Berserk. So that as they're healing, they're also gaining damage, so they become pretty overwhelming over the course of the game. And then you top that off with some taunt and a little healing, so that you can top them off and keep them gaining up health as they kind of ramp up. Because you can take some pretty devastating attacks back, so you want to top them off so they can build that health back up before they're taken out. And then you also have a little target acquired in here so that you can remove really big threats from a safe distance, and also keep up that momentum a little bit. So really powerful deck. Those are the ones that do my best by far. I've got others kind of in the range there, but just some real quick tips on that. The way the meta works, and I'm going to do an actual like laddering session where I'm pushing for that top 6% later. But the big bogeymen you really want to be able to deal with are Tolmaron. His ability is this: whenever you deploy a Space Marine card, your currently deployed Space Marine cards get an extra range damage. He can hit incredibly hard. He's got some really, really big flyers, so they're going to be a fast deck that hits very hard. You need to be able to tank that or kill it quickly. The other kind of boogeyman being Artemis. He's particularly challenging with that deck I just showed, that Mozrog deck, because his ability is whenever he plays a friendly card, it just hits a random enemy card for 20% of its starting wounds, which of course will be more damage depending on how powerful that card was. So that's something definitely to watch out for. And then the other boogeyman, the really scary ones. You'll hit all of these and they'll all be their own specific challenges, but at the top tier, if you really want to compete, the ones you really need to know how to beat are the ones I'm running through right now. Badrak is a major one that comes up quite a bit. So his ability is... What is this? Can I not see this? Here we go, okay. Whenever one of your orc cards destroys an enemy card with a ranged attack, it then attacks again for a little over half of its power. Now his decks end up with like really, really big tanky cards that have huge range damage, and so he will be very difficult to remove while getting bonus attacks against you and hitting incredibly hard. Also, all of the vehicles he ends up with in his deck, and mine's a weird one, that's a bad example, all of the range cards he has in his deck are going to be very fast, so he's going to tend to hit hard, and they're very difficult to remove. Also note that said a ranged attack, it does not have to be on your turn. So if he has a card... there's a plane that you'll see in a lot of these decks. This guy here. They can drop for 112 damage, and at top level it can drop for 147, and it will drop the full 147 when it's deployed. So it'll get a free attack, and then very easily cause a board wipe. So you gotta watch out for this guy dropping, and make sure you're prepared for it. Either prepared to take that loss and take the board wipe and come back from it, or put something in front of where this guy's gonna land that can tank those hits. And extremely scary. And then the other one is this one. This one has Barrage. So when it makes a primary attack, it'll hit the cards adjacent to the card it's hitting, and if it kills an adjacent card, that also can trigger a bonus attack, and then there's no limit to the number of bonus shots the Badrak can shoot. So if this card I've seen this card attack like 9 times with some endless cards on the board, killing adjacent cards, and then hitting the primary card so many times that it takes it out and then gets a bonus. It's crazy to see these things chain. So you need a deck that has the durability to handle Badrak, as he's very common in mid to upper tiers, or you need to have a deck that's so good against other types that you can take the losses versus Badrak and not worry about it. The other guy that's kind of a boogeyman right now is, of course, our intro guy, Akaran. Probably really familiar with this guy. He's the tutorial warlord, but he has the first time a friendly Space Marine card would die, it doesn't die, instead comes back with 5 health. So you have to kill all these cards multiple times, and this will most often include... Let me pull him up. Oh, come on. My bad, sorry. These decks that you'll run into a lot will most often include at least this guy, who is shielded up to shielded 4, and so is very difficult to remove, and while you're trying to remove him, there are other bodyguards hitting you, and you have to kill him twice, because he's in an Akaran deck. Very challenging to deal with, so you want a combination of Barrage, Furious Charge, Warp Surge, cards that attack on drop, or that hit adjacent cards, so you can get some bonus damage to pick off those cards that have 5 health, so you can get those second kills on. And so those are kind of the big ones you really need to be able to meet. You will see a combination of the other cards, but those are kind of the hardest ones to deal with, and the ones you need to tech for the most. If you are starting out, I do recommend, one of the reasons that these warlords are so good is because they're good for starting players. So you can play as these bogeymen I was just talking about, with Tolmaron himself being one of the more flexible ones. Some other really good starting warlords are Zephyrblade, who whenever any card is destroyed, all of your cards left, either in your deck or on the board, get a flat bonus to their ranged attack. Because he benefits from cards dying, including friendly cards, he can ramp up, and even your lower level cards can compete later in the game, where other cards wouldn't. So he's a good starter. He's one of the ones I ran with really early on and did well with. Of course, Artemis is another good choice. Rakarth is a little forgiving because he can let your cards heal throughout the game, and then your end game cards are quite scary. Let's see, I'm focusing specifically on the starter warlords that are really good. I did get a lot of benefit from Farsight. He's what we would call a Highlander warlord, because he goes for the head. He's an assassin warlord where you play through the game, and then his job is to take out the enemy warlord as quick as possible in a one-on-one fight. It's not going to ladder that well until you level him pretty heavily, but he's a very powerful card and does a really good job early on when you're starting out, especially since most Tau decks are ranged, so you're going to do a lot of shooting attacks, build up your melee, and have a really powerful melee attack to hit with when he deploys. So he was one I worked on early, and then same reasoning, Gazgul, who is very, very beefy himself, and he's one of the few warlords that can take a hit, so he can actually duke it out with enemy warlords a couple times, and throughout the game he actually becomes more powerful as your cards get kills, even if you're losing, so he can turn a game at the very end. The last warlord I personally recommend for starting is going to be the Turbigon. Not highly rated, but it's one of my best cards. The reason being, this one gets a free card. You start with a Termagant, which they don't show you the card, but it's just a little ranged attacker that never runs out. So every time it dies, you get a new copy in your deck. So this is a card where, as you're starting out, you will never ever be out of bodyguards, because you'll always be able to keep replaying those Termagants. Really excellent. Like buffer, it gets to be a very powerful card later on, but this is a great starting card if you're just getting started in the game too. It'll really help you get out of some tight spots, because you can always clog up a lane with your little body there. Note that does make you vulnerable to Badrak, because you have a fragile card that can pretty easily be taken out repeatedly, so heads up on that. Yeah, that is your initial laddering tips. Drop me a note or a comment if you want me to cover anything else, but yeah, good luck out there, and see you again soon.